Hello, this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and I wanted to take a minute as we wrap up this year to wish you all a Merry Christmas. Right now it's 3:15 in the morning on Christmas Day. We went to a nighttime mass with the family this evening, and then came home, and Dania and I just finished wrapping all the gifts and hanging all the stockings and all that stuff. So we're ready for the kids in the morning. And as I was wrapping up, I thought I would just take a minute to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, and also suggest a New Year's resolution. As we start thinking about the new year, I'd like to give you something to think about and to reflect on over the next week as you consider New Year's resolutions. When we consider resolutions for the new year, we're usually moved by some frustration that we have with a bad habit, some weakness, some bad habit that troubles our conscience and frustrates us. We think, well, I'd like to start exercising, or I'd like to eat more carefully, or I'd like to sleep a little less, or maybe a little more. I'd like to be more organized. I'd like to be more disciplined. I'd like to pray more regularly. All these different resolutions that are usually concerned with either cutting something out of our life or tightening up the discipline of our life. And that's what makes it so difficult to actually keep our resolutions. The essential quality of a human being is that we're weak. That's what's wrong with us. We're weak. That's just, if you wanted to sum up the condition we live in, as fallen creatures made in the image and likeness of God, we're simply weak. We don't have the strength to do the things that we want to do and need to do. And we often sit around with our minds running wild, because our minds have no limits in this sense. They can think about and plan and make resolutions freely, but like Jesus told us, he said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. That's what's wrong. We're just too weak. We're weak. Even if we think about, what we need to overcome this situation, what we need is God's grace, and all grace is strength. That's what grace is. Grace is strength. God gives his people strength. He gives it to them in different ways, in different degrees, for different purposes. He also chooses in many ways to not give us strength. He leaves us in our weakness for a number of different reasons, according to his own wisdom and love for us. But we're weak, and therefore making resolutions, promising ourselves we're going to do things that require strength when we may not receive the grace that's needed to do these things. And it's obviously good to pray for that grace, but nevertheless, it's hard for us to make resolutions presuming upon some strength or grace that we may not receive. And then we're frustrated, and we break our resolutions, and we end up discouraged and maybe even depressed because we fail to do the things that we desire to do. And that's this constant cycle of frustration, which is good for us because it always leads us back to the gospel, that Christ came into the world to save sinners. So I'd like to suggest a different resolution this year. Like I said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And most of our resolutions are related to things that we've got to do in the flesh. And there are things that we're weak with. There are things that we don't have strength to do, and we prove that time and time again. We prove we don't have the strength. And I'm not discouraging anyone from seeking to do things that require strength and praying for grace. But I'm simply suggesting a different kind of resolution that may actually be in your power as a human being, even in your physical weakness, in the weakness of the flesh. The resolution that I'd like to encourage you to consider for the new year is to take up the study of philosophy. I'd like you to consider taking up the study of philosophy as your resolution for the new year. Now, we often don't talk about these things because when we think about saints, we think about sacraments and prayer and theology and things like that. But you can't name a saint who didn't study and teach and know and use philosophy as an important part of his life. We don't talk about it much today because education is so heavily dominated by math and science classes, which really are not in our interest. We all know that. We know that, in middle school, we know that we're studying things that we really don't need, and we study them at the neglect of things that we do need. And that's an error that we're making, and we continue to make it generation after generation. And we neglect more important subjects, namely philosophy, just completely neglected. In fact, when I say consider studying philosophy, you may not even know what I'm talking about, because you may think of a college intro to philosophy class, which has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. So this is a problem that I'd like to recommend working to solve this year. And consider making your New Year's resolution to take up the study of philosophy. Now, I'm willing to help you with this. In the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we have the full course of studies in philosophy available, and if you're a Catholic adult, you're welcome to come and study them at no cost. So I'd like to recommend this to you and also invite you to take me up on this offer, to take up the study of philosophy. Now, you may be wondering, well, if I was to do that, what would I even do? How would I take up the study of philosophy? And you might think it's some crazy, far out, wacky thinking that you've got to learn about. And again, that's probably because you had a bad experience in a college philosophy class. This has nothing to do with that college nonsense. This is real philosophy I'm talking about. So there's a couple of options for how to get started. And I'm talking to adults here, so I wouldn't recommend this to children, but I would recommend this to adults. You have a couple of options. If you're a Christian person, if you're a Catholic adult, you probably want to get started and stick to moral philosophy, because as a Catholic, you'll feel like it's immediately relevant and useful. And there's two different ways to get started in moral philosophy. The first and simpler way is to start by studying Aesop's fables. Now, you may think that's kind of silly or childish for me to recommend Aesop's fables. Aren't they kids' stories? Well, they can be read by kids, and we encourage kids to read them, but they're by no means kids' stories. They're moral fables. It's like saying Jesus' parables are just kids' stories. No, they're not. They're actually profound philosophical and in Jesus' case, theological lessons taught in the form of a parable or a fable. And the same is true of Aesop's fables. They're not theological, but they're moral. They're philosophical. So it presents moral instruction from a different angle and by different means. So I would recommend that you take up the regular study of Aesop's fables. It's very simple, very pleasant. You can read a fable a week and just make your way through all of Aesop's fables. There's like 400 fables in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's Aesop's Fables course. You can make it your goal to study and meditate on one fable a week, one of Aesop's fables a week. And I assure you, if you committed to that, you would be very happy that you did after just a few weeks. You'd start to see the value of these fables, and they're just wonderful, helpful tools to have in your pocket, as it were, as a Christian, because anytime you need to talk about morals, or you need to teach a child or correct an adult, you can make use of the fables to help you do that. And the more you learn them, the more familiar you become with them, the more useful that they'll become. And even in your own life, they'll clarify many moral issues and be a source of good counsel. When you have decisions to make or issues to think through, you can say, what could I find, or what could I look for in Aesop's fables that would offer me some direction on this issue? And you'll very often find answers in the fables if you study them. So that's a simple place to start. You could say, in 2023, one of my New Year's resolutions is going to be to take up the study of moral philosophy, and I'm going to do so by studying Aesop's fables. Try to study one fable a week. And just, think, if you could do that for a year, you would have studied over 50 of Aesop's fables just by doing one a week. Just a simple, accessible goal for yourself. If you would just do one a week, and, I'll help you with it. One a week, you will have studied over 50 fables of Aesop by the end of the year. And if you do it the following year, you'll have 100. And if you do that, I'm telling you from my own experience, you won't be able to imagine how you ever lived without Aesop's fables. So that's one option, the simplest option, and one that I'd recommend. And again, all of the fables are available in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and you can study them at no cost. So I invite you to do that. If you wanted to enroll, just to get this out of the way while I'm talking about it, just go to classicalliberalaarts.com/study and create a free account. You can add the course for free and start studying, and just communicate with me if you need any help with anything, and we'll get started together. So studying Aesop's fables is a very, very realistic and practical way to get started in the study of real philosophy. If you're a little more committed than that and eager than that, and you want to get into something a little more technical, then I'd recommend Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. In the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, the course is just called Classical Ethics. And you'll find much of the same instruction that you'll learn about in Aesop's fables and throughout sacred scripture or church teaching, but it's presented in a philosophical way with philosophical arguments, which are different from religious arguments, the kind of arguments you'll find in the Catechism, for example. Philosophical arguments present issues and provides persuasive proof of different issues, not based on faith and divine revelation, but based simply on human reason. And sometimes having moral issues proven to you by reason alone and not religious faith is actually a source of confidence. It's helpful sometimes to have moral instruction explained philosophically. So if you want more of a challenge, and again, this is an intellectual challenge, not a physical challenge, it's intellectual, I'd recommend Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, which, like I said, can be studied in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's Classical Ethics course. if you get started there in either Aesop's fables or classical ethics or both, whatever you'd like to do, and you make that commitment and get started and stick to it, and it's not a hard resolution to keep, to take up the study of philosophy, you can then make future commitments and go deeper and deeper, little by little, into the study of philosophy. And I'm telling you, once you get into real philosophy, not fake modern school or college nonsense, but real historic philosophy, the stuff that wise men and saints actually studied, you won't be able to imagine how you ever lived without it. I think you'll be stunned at how helpful it is, and you'll be even more stunned to think about the fact that this has all been taken out of schools and replaced with math and science classes. You really can't grasp how terrible modern education is until you begin studying real philosophy, and I'd like to encourage you to do that. So Aesop's fables, Aristotle's ethics. There are other moral writings like the moral essays of Seneca, the Stoic writings of Epictetus. You can either look these up online and just study them, or study them, with me in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. But I'd like to recommend you consider taking up the study of philosophy as a New Year's resolution as we get ready for the new year. It's great to set goals for personal disciplines. It's great to say, I'd like to fast more. I'd like to pray more. I'd like to go to Mass more. I'd like to sleep less. I'd like to be more disciplined, on and on. But sometimes we just don't have the strength to discipline our bodies more, and that's really not our problem. When I look at most modern people, I think that one of the main problems they have is because they don't have philosophical studies in their life. They have lots of free time, and that free time that they have becomes a source of bad habits. So overeating, watching television, getting into all kinds of idle sins and things like that, it's primarily caused by the presence of idleness, that the people don't have anything better to do. And so they're constantly trying to deny themselves things, but there's nothing to take the place of those vices that they're constantly fighting against, where you have to understand that human beings are supposed to be studying philosophy. It's supposed to take up our time. It's supposed to be how we use our leisure hours, not idle literature studies and things that are popular today, but real philosophical studies. And all of these studies are self-paced. Just take your time, bite off as much as you can chew, and chew on it until you've got it digested, and then move on to the next piece. But I'd like to recommend you considering taking up the study of philosophy this year as a New Year's resolution. So again, that's all in the context of celebrating the Christmas holiday first. And as I said, it's actually 3:30 a.m. here in North Carolina. We just got done putting all the gifts under the tree, and we're wrapping up for the night, ready for the kids to get up in the morning. And I just wanted to wrap up in my office here, say Merry Christmas to everyone, and put that thought in your mind to consider taking up the study of philosophy as a New Year's resolution next week. So I wish you all a Merry Christmas. God bless you all and give you a Happy New Year.